a team's perspective, I don't know, but it made much more sense for the Grizzlies, obviously, when it was MarShon instead of Dillon. But I do think the MarShon Brooks trade the Grizzlies thought they were going to make, I think was clearly a good trade.
Right.
The Dillon Brooks trade that Phoenix thought they were going to make, I think ultimately would have been a bad trade for the Grizzlies, and I ultimately would not have done it. But it was not as clear cut. To me, that's like something you have a meeting about. Whereas the MarShon thing is something you just do.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Because I do think Kelly Oubre, like in a vacuum, if you're betting on who has the better career going forward, Kelly Oubre or Dillon Brooks, I think you have to bet on Kelly Oubre. It's the contract stuff that tips the balance.
Right. Yeah. So Dillon Brooks, on that cheap second rounders deal for a couple more seasons, and him along with Jaren Jackson being probably the only two guys who are going to outplay their contracts. I guess you could argue maybe Shelvin Mack is playing above his head, but in the coming seasons, with the Grizzlies team, it's like to win, you normally need to have people outplay.
Keith, maybe you missed it. The Javon Carter era began over the weekend.
I'm gonna table that. We'll get to Javon Carter at the very end. Javon Carter with the most promising debut since Wade Baldwin 4. Lovely first game. No, actually, if they traded Dillon Brooks, you said like that they invested effort into marketing him over the summer. The last three people the Grizzlies have sent to Nashville for their Grizz Caravan, it's Dillon Brooks, Wade Baldwin 4, and Brandon Wright. So all three of those guys got gone immediately after their almost. They saved Dillon.
I mean, two of those guys had some Nashville connections, right?
Sure, they do.
And so there was that.
Yeah, but no. So yeah, again, my thought being bringing in Kelly Oubre seems fun, but also I guess the rational thought is we need to hang on to Dillon because we got to have cheap guys making money, and Kelly Oubre will have to be signed beyond this season to help out. Well, so let's
yeah, I mean, there's that. But what if Kelly Oubre gets an offer you don't want to match,
right?
And now you've lost Dillon Brooks and a couple second round picks for nothing, right? So it was just too much of a risk.
Yeah. So why do you think one of the answers or questions I haven't seen addressed is why did the Phoenix really want Dillon Brooks? They have Josh Jackson and Mikal Bridges, who are pretty much.
It is weird. They have all these wings there. They have Josh Jackson, they have Mikal Bridges, they have Devin Booker, they've got TJ Warren, sort of a 3-4, I guess. But like there's a lot. Those positions are, and who knows, D'Anthony Melton, is he a point guard? I mean, those positions are crowded there. I guess it is, you're going to lose Trevor Ariza for nothing one way or another. And so what's the best future asset you can get for Trevor Ariza? I mean, is it Dillon Brooks? Maybe. I don't know. But Dillon Brooks would have been some level of future asset, right? A young wing player who has demonstrated a certain level of NBA ability and who is on a cheap team-controlled contract. So that's a decent asset to get. Is it an obvious fit in Phoenix? No. I mean, they need a point guard. Bad. But I don't know. I mean, we're talking about the Grizzlies not wanting to move Dillon Brooks for Kelly Oubre and the reasons why you would do that. And so the Suns just traded Ariza for Kelly Oubre. I mean, so if the Grizzlies viewed Dillon Brooks as a better asset, why would Phoenix as well?
Yeah. I guess that's fair. It's like all those guys in Phoenix, they can't really size up and play the 4. Like Mikal Bridges and Josh Jackson aren't natural 4s. And it's weird. Those guys, as much as we talk about wing versatility in the NBA, those guys seem to be like, they're switchy, but they don't have the size to be bigger. And you have Devin Booker. I mean, maybe they'll play Devin Booker at the 1, that's your shooting guard. So it's all peculiar. Now they have more to work out with Austin Rivers and Kelly Oubre if he sticks. Anyway,
oh man, I didn't think about that. Austin Rivers in Phoenix is it's just sort of a rough situation.
Yeah, I mean, especially when Melton has started playing well for them. D'Anthony Melton, like he's fine, at least like intriguing. Let's let him play point guard. But anyway, let's turn it back to the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies, who are now 4-8 since they were in first place in the Western Conference. Are they slumping? I saw you just wrote on the Daily Memphian that question. Do you think they're slumping right now?
I do think it is more of a slump than a regression to what they are. And I think if you look closer at it, you will see that they weren't as good as the 12-5 record in those games, and they haven't been as bad as the 4-8 record in these recent games. If you look at point differential, it tells a little bit different story, which tends to be a little bit better indicator of what you really are. Like you just look at records, it's like they went from a bottom 5 team to a top 10 to a bottom. I'm sorry. If you look at records, it looks like they went from a top 5 team to a bottom 5 team.
Mm-hmm.
In that swing, if you look at point differential, it looks like they went from the number 10 team to the number 20 team. And that's sort of the story that tells. And I think that's the more realistic story. Now that's still a drop, right? And so the question is, like, can they get back to what they were early in the season? And the answer is certainly not a definite yes, but I think it's at least a maybe, because it's no accident to me that this slide has coincided with Mike Conley and Marc Gasol being banged up. Gasol's been playing on a pretty bad ankle injury, like a far worse ankle injury than Kyle Anderson just missed a game for. Like Gasol just played through it. I mean, he played 47 minutes in the first game after the ankle injury. Mike Conley had a dislocated finger that clearly limited him for a couple of games, but he just played with it. And he said this hamstring thing, he's just playing with it. And so, at some point, you hope you can get both those guys healthier. It seems like maybe Gasol is trending that way. He had his best game. His game against Houston on the second night of a back-to-back was the best game he's had since he's had the injury. Mm-hmm. So the hope is maybe he's coming out of it a little bit. And so if you can get sort of good Gasol, good Conley again at some point later in the season, then I think that starts to fix all kinds of things. But there's also this question of sort of how the role players and the rest of the supporting cast evolves around it. I think one of the stories of the good start was Garrett Temple and Shelvin Mack were shooting the ball great, and now they're not. And I think I would bet on not for the most part going
right.
forward, right? Joakim Noah was this huge energy burst in the first 2 games when you brought him on, and he's been pretty bad since. And so I think they probably need to scale him back to what people thought he would be, which was more of a situational center and not an every night, 14-minute a game rotation player. Jaren Jackson has had sort of the ups and downs. He's into a little bit of a lull now. Is he going to hit a rookie wall, or is he going to bounce through and be better later in the season? And then what kind of bump are you going to get from Dillon Brooks when he comes back in a couple of weeks? Is Javon Carter going to stick in the rotation? What he's going to do? So I think there's all kinds of questions. But because there's all kinds of questions, there's all kinds of answers. And so there has never been a point this season, even when they were first in the West, where I said the Grizzlies will be a playoff team. I've never said that. But I'm certainly not at the point where I would say they won't. I don't think the West is going to run away from them anytime soon, even if they have a bad road trip. And so I think that they have plenty of runway to get back on track and be a playoff team. I still would not predict them to do so. If I had to predict today who the away teams are, the Grizzlies would not be on the list. There's not been a single day this season in which they would have been on that list. I still don't think it's out of the question by any means.
Yeah, I think we podcasted on right when the Grizzlies were 12-5, and I think we still were kind of I think they might finish 9th. That was our most optimistic.
Right.
And other people have asked me what's wrong with the Grizzlies, and I'm kind of well, they've been doing pretty well, and Dillon Brooks isn't even there. They're still kind of struggling to figure out who's playing, and this is kind of who I thought they would be. It's not great. They've been losing some home games, but they've been in all their games. It's they lost a game to the Heat. It wasn't a great loss, but you assumed the Heat were going to be better than they'd been playing. They just had pulled off a road trip where the Heat got 4 wins on a road trip. The Heat are a fine team, and it's losing to the Rockets. The Rockets hit their shots. So I haven't been discouraged yet in these losses, but maybe I'm just a calloused older fan now and don't feel the pain as much.
I think one of the sneaky disappointing things is they've been pretty average to below average in closing out games and sort of quote unquote clutch situations. And the Grizzlies for years, not last year when they were a terrible team, but for the most of the previous playoff run was year after year, I think 6 years in a row, among the very best teams in the NBA in their sort of net rating, their ultimate, their performance in clutch situations. And that was a lot of that was about Conley and Gasol and how well they executed together and team defense and everything. And they've been a little bit below average. They're actually a net negative slightly, but a net negative in those situations this season. And they're a team that's going to, if they're good at all, they're going to play a lot of close games. They're going to have to win a lot of close games. And they haven't been great at that. And you've seen a lot of that lately. To your point, they got blown out in that game by the Lakers. But for the most part, they're playing single-digit games every night.
Yeah, I always attributed that success in close victories to Tony Allen. That was my thing. But
Could be.
One thing that's really weird about the Grizzlies right now, and you said they have a lot of questions, they have a lot of answers. Like, they have a lot of players who they kind of want to play, and a lot of nights they play a lot of guys. And I've been tracking this, and it's kind of blowing my mind. We're speaking on Monday afternoon. The second quarter of Grizzlies games, they have put out a different lineup to start the second quarter in 14 consecutive games. They've played a unique 5-man combination 14 consecutive times, which seems almost impossible to pull off unless you're doing it on purpose.
Well, what's particularly odd about that is like their starting lineups haven't really fluctuated much this season for the most part. And so it's not something where you just got new guys out like every night, and it's not like the 28 player Grizzlies of 2 years ago, right? I mean, you're doing that for the most part with the same pool of players every night. So that is odd.
I don't know. I almost think they're doing it on purpose. Like, the odds of this randomly happening seem astronomical. Like, to not repeat the same lineup, for a 14 game stretch seems wild. And like, I feel like that's, I guess, the biggest obstacle with this coaching staff is kind of, I think they have to figure out who they want to play. And like, when Dillon Brooks comes back, assume like maybe MarShon Brooks and Wayne Selden's minutes, they all go to Dillon Brooks perhaps. I'm kind of hoping, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, making Joakim Noah more of a spot player. And also there's the whole thing, like, I want JaMychal Green to play less, even though he looks like he's doing a pretty good job out there. I don't know if I would rather see lineups with one, Jaren Jackson Jr., who I like to see finish games, even though he's a rookie, he's having trouble. I want him out there, and then I want to see more Caspi and more Kyle Anderson at the 4.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get to Anderson and Caspi at the 4 now with Gasol, Green, Jackson, and Noah like all there healthy. I mean, when they were playing there earlier in the season, Green was out and Noah hadn't been signed, and Rab, he wasn't really good, and so you played a lot of that small ball. But you're right, they were effective with that. Like, Caspi and Anderson were sort of good with that. And so, I mean, I think it would be nice if you could tilt your roster in a way that let you do that more. But the other thing is, if that works for you, maybe you should just do it anyway. You should find a way. And so I do think Noah, like the Houston game, they played him nearly 8 minutes in the first half, and he was terrible, and the team was terrible with him on the floor. I mean, you struggle to keep up with Houston's scoring at the best of times. With Noah on the floor, like, you have no hope. And he really didn't have anybody to guard. I mean, they're playing P.J. Tucker at the 4 and Clint Capella at the 5. And other than the few minutes Nene's in the game, like, there's not really a matchup for him. And so I just feel like he was so good the first 2 games, and he's such a big presence. They just sort of easily slipped into this idea that, like, he's a rotation player. And I would hope, we'll see what happens on this road trip. The fact that Bickerstaff DNP'd him in the second half against Houston, I would hope that there was a realization there that, like, we don't really need to play him every night. It needs to be matchup dependent, right?
He also seemed surprised he played in the first game they signed him. So, like, if Joakim's surprised he's playing this much, maybe let's turn it down some.
But I think you make him a spot minute guy, a matchup guy. I think it's clear that Selden is not in their plans at this point. And so as Dillon Brooks and Jawai Carter come back, I think Selden probably will not finish the season on the roster. MarShon Brooks might still. Like, I don't think they'll move him unless they need to move him. I think that's a little bit different situation. But, at some point, I feel like playing Dillon Brooks, playing Jawai Carter, playing Jaren Jackson more, those are things that will make the Grizzlies better this season ultimately. But they're also the things they need to do if they think beyond this season.
Yeah.
Like, Jaren Jackson is your foundation. And I think you pretty well know you don't have your like sidekick yet. And how you get that, I don't know. But who else like can transition with him as part of a rotation? And they signed Kyle Anderson to a 4-year contract for that very purpose. And I think they certainly hope that Dillon Brooks and Jevon Carter can maybe be that too. And like, let's start finding out as soon as we can.
Right. I think early in the season, I got real frustrated with the coaching staff, and I could have toned it down some, but it was based on Jaren Jackson Jr. and Kyle Anderson are going to be Grizzlies next year. I would rather lose with them on the court than like Garrett Temple and Shelvin Mack. Just like those guys, we don't know. Like, I'm fine, they're playing well, but I'd rather lose with these guys and know who are going to be Grizzlies. But let's finish last thing real quick. You mentioned it, Jevon Carter. His first game against the Rockets, incredibly promising. He looked amazing. A spark plug out there, stole the ball from Chris Paul and James Harden, gave the Grizzlies life in that second half. What were they waiting for to put him on the court?
It doesn't bother me that he didn't play from the jump, but I thought this was 2 or 3 weeks overdue. And I'd been sort of calling for it for the last couple of weeks on and off at various, whenever people would ask me.